Somewhere out there, in a classroom or staying up late at home, a teacher is planning that next great lesson that will inspire and change a child's life. Whether they're looking for new, innovative ways to engage and motivate students, or connecting learning to real life in a hands-on way, it's always with the end in mind and the context of global citizenship and advancing our humanity. Join us on our search for leading voices in education across the globe as we convene to talk about the topics that matter and inspire all educators in the pursuit of that next great lesson. Welcome to Educators Without Borders, presented by SchoolRubric.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Wallace Ting. I'm the co-founder of SchoolRubric, and I am super excited today. We have a special episode of Educators Without Borders, where we are convening leading voices in education. I have with me today three outstanding colleagues from the world of international education to talk about an important issue facing our schools and communities, which is about international school boards and governance. So I do want to bring my colleagues on screen, learn a little bit more about them and their schools. So welcome, Jeremy. Welcome, Katerina. Welcome, Audrey. We'd love to learn a little bit more about each one of you, your role, and a little bit more about your school and their governance model. So Jeremy, I'd love to start with you.
Great, thanks a lot, Wallace. Good to see you. I'm Jeremy Moore. I'm the director of the American International School of Johannesburg. This is my second year, and I have new experiences with a new board that I can share in this episode. But prior to AISJ, I was with Cayman International School. I was the director there, and prior to that, I was in public school education for quite a while. In Florida before moving overseas, and I spent 10 years in Cayman, and this is my second year at AISJ.
Awesome. Jeremy, before we move on, can you share a little bit about your governance model at AISJ?
Right, so we have a maximum of 5 elected board members and 4 appointed. Our board has a structure that requires an ambassador's representative to the U.S. Embassy, and it also requires a maximum that the board members have a majority of U.S. citizens. There's other components as well, but those are the overall main composition. We do gap analyses too to try and bring diversity to the board, etc. But that's the basic structure.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy. Let me pass the baton over to you, Katerina. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your school, and your school's governance model.
Sure. Hi, my name is Katerina Song Chen. As Wallace has mentioned, I'm the head of school of the American School of Belo Horizonte in Brazil. I am now serving in this capacity for 13 years. And our governance structure is legally called the Board of Directors. They are responsible for managing our association. And all 7 board members are elected by the association. And they are responsible for hiring, but also responsible for firing the executive director, which is myself. I have their legal power of attorney to act on behalf of the board. So they pretty much grant me full control of the organization and its operation.
Awesome. Thank you, Katerina. So we're already beginning to see some similarities and differences in international schools and how they're governed. Audrey, I want to pass it over to you. Love to learn a little bit more about your work, your history, but also about ISP and the governance model there.
Thank you, Wallace. This is Audrey Menard. I am currently the head of school at the International School of Panama. This is my 4th international school, and I have 12 years of head of school experience, prior to this. My board, first of all, we're a not-for-profit board, and a not-for-profit board looks very different than a for-profit board. We have 9 members, and of those members, 4 are appointed and 5 are elected. Of the 4 that are appointed, we select the 2 organizations that send us the largest number of students and provide them a seat on the board. And again, that's appointed with the board approvals. And so currently that happens to be the U.S. Embassy and a Procter & Gamble, which is a multinational in the area. Similarly, their job responsibilities, one of them is hiring, evaluating, and finding the next head of school. And I'm the one employee of the board. And then the rest of the school falls under my responsibility as the CEO, is the language that we use. The board also has they have fiduciary responsibility of the school. Strategic planning and the mission they sign off on, although I'm a close partner in. And they also look at anything strategic, avoiding the weeds, which I know is a topic that we're going to get into, but it's often one of any board's struggle is to try to stay at that, 50,000 foot level. So, but I have a great board, and it's been a real pleasure working here in Panama. And we have our school's about 1,200 students, and the board is all made up of parents. So, thank you, Wallace.
All right, thank you so much for sharing, Audrey. And so you can see that we have 3 really experienced directors from all over the world with a lot of experience to share. So I invite you to listen and really learn as much as you can, whether you are another international school director thinking about getting into the world of international education, an aspiring administrator yourself, or a school board member. And this is the first part of a series that we are planning to launch as a course at SchoolRubric, focusing on international school board dynamics and governance. So make sure you go to schoolrubric.org, register for the course, look at some of our other material. But let's jump in right into it. I know one of the things that we want to start this conversation about talking about is the head of school and board chair relationship, which is just so critical. So let's look at our first question. Effective school boards are accountability driven, spending less time on operational issues and more time focused on policies to improve student achievement. Many school boards struggle to find the right balance between strategic and operational matters of a school. What are some strategies that have been helpful to recognize each individual's role, responsibility, and contribution on the school board? So excuse me there, I misspoke. Our first topic, that'll be our second topic, but our first topic is talking a little bit about that difference between strategy and operational. I think, Audrey, you made a good comment there about staying out of the weeds. So maybe we'll start with you, and then we can just kick it around and have a dialogue about the role and the responsibility of a school board, strategic versus operational.
Sure, I'm happy to start. I've had many different experiences with the 4 different schools where I've worked with a board, and it has really varied. And I think a lot of it has to do with the ethos of the board before you even walk in the door. You can tell whether or not they know what their role is. Have they spent time in professional development? Do they all have a handbook? Like for me, the International Trustee Handbook, if that you have like a Bible you can report back to like that, it really helps. And it helps work through things. Although I will say with COVID, I think it's been more appropriate for them to get in the weeds than before COVID, just because there's been so much gray area navigating that. But all in all, I think you need a board that is willing to grow and look at professional development for themselves and have an open partnership with you on those areas, because the gray is going to exist.
Jeremy, Katerina, what has been your experience so far?
One of the things, to just expand upon what Audrey was already talking about, there's a pretty common model out there that's discussed a lot these days in international schools: governance as leadership, talking about the roles of the board, fiduciary, strategic, and generative. with fiduciary being that really baseline responsibility for sustainability of the organization, protecting assets, looking at budgets and resource allocations, strategic being what are the drivers and priorities of the organization, and generative is the one that often gets overlooked. How do we leverage the intellectual capacity of these board members? These are high functioning, really intelligent individuals that come from a lot of different places with different perspectives, a lot of value to add. How do we engage in conversation and dialogue with them to be in a generative mode that helps us move to the next level as an organization versus just protecting assets and looking at priorities and drivers, but really looking at the next level of the school.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Jeremy, because I remember when I used to be a former international school director, we used to have these marathon board meetings that would last 4, 5, 6 hours, and everyone knew they weren't fun. They weren't exciting. They weren't generative. And so the big question became, how can we make them generative? How can we get there and get out of the slog? Katarina, I'm interested to know your experience because you've had such a long tenure in Belo Horizonte, 13 years. So certainly you've been able to probably do a lot of work with your board in this regard.
Yes, and there were many trials and errors, I'll tell you that. And during my 13th year tenure, I've had 8 different board presidents. So I've learned a lot during this process. And you're right, initially, we used to meet in the evenings. And just like you said, we would have meetings that would start, let's say, 7 or 8 p.m. and would go straight into midnight and not necessarily being productive. So we made a few changes over the years, and now we make sure that we meet first thing in the morning. So we meet at 7:45 and we get done in an hour or an hour and a half max. And that has been really helpful for us. But we do meet frequently, and I guess frequently it may vary what that means for other schools, but for us, it means we pretty much meet once a month. And that's pretty frequent to make sure that our board is aware of everything that's going on, and especially, my relationship, I think you're going to get into that later, but my relationship with the board president is one that I believe is has to be tight knit, and we always have to be on the same page and make sure that I'm always informing him of what's going on. But just like Audrey and Jeremy said, yes, the fiduciary and strategic is something that we're always engaging in, especially because that is their responsibility. And generative is something that we need to, especially now with so many issues that we're facing in modern education. There's so many conversations that need to be held about how do we get there to with all the constant changes that are going on in the world and in education. But I like to think that, with me, with our board, their job is to pretty much say, okay, you're playing in the sandbox, Katarina, but these are your parameters. You kind of get to play within these parameters, and that's what they do with their policies. And then they just kind of give me the freedom to get to where we need to go with a lot of freedom and support.
Yeah, I like the whole meeting in the morning because when you meet in the morning, the meeting has to end, right? So you probably can't have a marathon meeting. But as I talk about marathon meetings, I saw Jeremy and Audrey, you kind of shake your head. And, I'm sure you've probably been through your share of marathon meetings. What other strategies, Jeremy and Audrey, have you found effective to move from marathon meetings and meetings that are very operational to more generative and strategy-based conversations? What advice would you say for a board or another head of school? Here's an idea that you might try to move in this direction.
Well, for me, a lot of it comes back to the committees. Instead of trying to do every single thing in the middle of the board meeting, get the work done in the committees, and then you come back and you can have consent agendas where you just approve a whole bunch of things at once. And and you have goals. I mean, hopefully your board's got goals at the beginning of the year and they're working on them, and you're really addressing only one major topic that you're conversing about in a meeting. So if you have a smart plan, you can have really efficient meetings. I've certainly been with boards that were the marathon group, and my current board is wonderful now. It's very much like Katarina's, and the work is done mostly in committees. So that saves a lot.
Jeremy, what's been working for you?
Audrey said the key word to me, which is plan. You just have to be really intentional. So that's one of the things that our board is very good at, and our board chair is very good at, is we have a monthly calendar of the whole year planned out on kind of what are the key conversations we're going to have each month. What do we need to approve? What's upcoming? What committee work? We sort of have this grand scheme for the whole year laid out. And then part of that is intentionality of generative conversations that where we collaborate with the leadership team and the board together and bring the two groups together for conversations that are more generative. So it's just intentionality and planning.
Can I ask maybe one more question before we move on about the strategic and operational? I mean, there's been a lot of kind of discourse about some of this, what's happening on school boards, particularly in the United States. And I know, public schools and school boards in the United States are a little bit different, but there seems to be a lot of parent resentment about some actions that school boards are taking. And I know in international schools, many of our school board members are in fact parents of the community. So it's not difficult for a parent to be dropping their kid off of school and another parent approaching them and saying, well, I know that you're a school board member, so I really want to talk to you about this issue. And a lot of parents probably who are school board members know they probably shouldn't engage, but do engage. And that ends up permeating and getting it back to the board, or they come to you as the head of school or the superintendent and the director and say, hey, I need to close the office and I need to tell you something. This parent complained about X, Y, and Z. And that seems to be an in the weeds issue. So I guess the question is twofold. I'm sure we've all experienced it. What are some strategies that you've found effective to kind of draw the line in a very professional way as the head of school or superintendent or director of your organization?
Well, I don't mind jumping in first again. I mean, before I take a job, I interview the board as much as the board is interviewing me. And those are some of the very questions that I ask, because the last thing I want to do is leap into a school where a board has no idea what their role is. But I also think that it's good to have occasional table situations where you throw out a situation like that and ask them how they would handle it, what's the right perspective, and have everybody sort of norm on that. And that's been helpful. And then at times you've just got to say to people that forget, because I get their hat on, and just say, are you talking to me right now as a board member? Or are you talking to me right now as a parent? And you only represent the board really when you're all together, not one-on-one. And usually they're like, oh yeah, and they kind of snap back. But it is important to really lay out that clarity. And if a board doesn't know it before they hire you, they're not going to know it once you take the job, most likely. So I would say run from that job.
I really like that table talks. I think that's one of the things that we learned to do in our board in Nigeria after having gone through a number of issues and getting some board training. Jeremy, Katarina, any other thoughts to share or ideas?
Yeah, I like to say that our job is to constantly navigate and manage conflicts, because conflicts are always around us. Even our composition of the board, when you look at it, they are parents, thinking about the future of the school. But when we meet, I often like to remind our board that we are one body, that one person is not the board, and that it's very natural for them to be approached in the parking lot, like you said, and say, hey, this problem's going on. And so we rehearse this a lot. So I like to, we all like to agree that if this happens, they say, well, thank you, because I think we do need to listen, right? We can't just say, no, you can't talk to me. They do have to allow the opportunity for the parents to approach them. They hear what they have to say and then say, thank you for sharing this with me. I do recommend that you take this to Katerina, who is the head of the school, and I will also be sure that I give her a heads up that we talked, and make sure that the board also follows through by giving me a heads up. But at least the parent knows that one person is not representing the board, and they're not going to make any spontaneous decisions or give them any suggestions or find a solution for them right there on the spot. So that's always important for us to always remember that we are one body, and always direct all the problems to me, because that's my job.
Jeremy, any last thoughts? Close us out on this topic before we move on.
No, I think I would just echo what they're saying. Essentially, it's around professional development, professional learning, role playing for these board members, setting expectations, helping them understand what some of these scenarios might be and how they might react, and trying to align with how they respond. So yeah, that's great.
All right. Thank you all for sharing. A persistent challenge in our schools, but some really effective strategies, I think, have been laid out here to help some of our schools really approach this issue. Let's move on to our second topic, which now is about the head of school and head board chair relationship. Let's take a look at our second question. A successful board chair prefers to meet with the head of school regularly, allowing for any matter, large or small, to be vetted before it turns into a bigger issue. Each head of school and board chair relationship is unique, but what are some of the common characteristics that can be found in all high-performing schools? Katerina, I want to maybe start with you, because you say that I know you've not only been at the school a long time, but you've been through 8 board chairs. Which is really fascinating. I was very fortunate to have one board chair only who I had a great relationship with. But how has that dynamic been? And having now gone through 8 board chairs, have you found some commonalities in terms of the way you manage that relationship?
Yeah, that's really tough. And knowing that each of the 8 board presidents have been very different profiles with different roles in their jobs, and how they perceive governance and management. Yeah, it's been challenging, but it takes, I guess, a lot of emotional intelligence as well when leading with different leadership styles. But the key is that as a head of school, I do need to develop a very strong, trusting relationship with the head of school. No matter what, I have to remind myself I am working for the board, and the board president is my boss. So I have to recognize that and make sure that I do my best to ensure that I clarify any doubts the board chair may have, make sure I keep him or her informed of large and small issues. And that's quite different from the monthly board meetings I may have with everyone. I do have a more regular, frequent connection with my board president. And I make sure that nothing comes up as a surprise to him or her, so that when a parent or a teacher or somebody approaches them, that they're aware of what may be going on. And if I think that even a small problem may be snowballing into something bigger, I want to make sure that they understand all the nuances of what's going on. And that has been very helpful, especially for me in making sure that I build this trusting relationship with my board chair.
Katerina, have you found that the communication that you've had with school board chairs is more informal and kind of as issues come up? Or have you found it more effective to have more standing meetings every Tuesday morning, or you have lunch every weekend or once a month? Is it more informal or formal for you?
For me, I like to keep that part of the relationship a little more informal. And my board president, although we are in Brazil, he's actually living in South Africa. So we have a WhatsApp chat where we quickly, just give each other a heads up on any issues. And if we think gets a little complicated, we just schedule a Zoom call and just kind of keep each other informed. But then, yes, we do have our formal meetings, but I do have an informal relationship with our board chair.
Jeremy, we may have to get Katarina's board chair, who's in South Africa, and your board chair together.
Yeah, or I can just steal her board chair and bring them out of my board.
Exactly. There you go. What's been effective for you, Jeremy, in terms of your relationship with your board chair?
Yeah, I have a great relationship with my board chair. She's fantastic. She's highly organized and is just really planned out. And also, she wants to ensure my success. And just me knowing that is really a big driver for me, understanding that she wants to make sure that the organization succeeds and that I'm a key part of that. So we meet every single week without fail. Obviously, other times beyond that weekly meeting, a lot of informal and formal, if you will. We both look at our roles as ensuring that there is a positive dynamic and connectivity between we're sort of the nexus between the board and the leadership team, if you will. And that key nexus is maybe the most important relationship in the entire organization. And to be honest, we've had some challenges at times, and we've had to be really intentional and bring in some people to help us. We've developed teaming principles that we would follow as board and leadership together, talking about a legacy principle. We all want the future of the organization to be better when we leave it. And the relationship principle and the communication principle. We set up these key principles so that when we do collaborate, that we recognize those principles going into key meetings. So that's just one example of her and I making sure that we're on the same page and that we are aligned and that we're trying to do the right things together.
Audrey, jump in.
So I would agree with all of that, especially the, no surprises piece. And I too meet weekly with my board chair, have a WhatsApp chat with my board chair, have a WhatsApp chat with my whole board. And so we all communicate pretty regularly. But I think maybe one additional thing that hasn't been mentioned that I've used my board chair as far as is in working with the other board members. For instance, they're all on committees. So like I'll call her and say, okay, this is what's happening in this committee, and I'm a little worried about the political fallout for this. You might want to give that chair a heads up, and so then she kind of knows ahead of time, and she can call and help on her end, kind of move the boards where they need to go. Sometimes if we're going to have a really controversial topic in a meeting, and this was the board chair before my current board chair, we would talk, and then he would call every single board member and kind of prime them before the conversation. So it wasn't like anybody was coming in that hadn't been heard or hadn't already known about the controversial topic, and that brought something that could have gone, again, lasting for 5 hours down to a pretty reasonable, brief conversation. So I feel like that board member working with me, we know the chair, we know where she'll know or he'll know how to read the board members ahead of time and how to work with them, and we'll know, okay, this is probably the best way forward, and then together we'll get people where they need to go. So I think that I would add that's been a really powerful component of the board head chair relationship.
I think that's kind of interesting because it's almost what Jeremy was saying about being the nexus, right? Where you have the board chair and the head of school, and the board chair, they keep each other informed and have a special relationship. And then the board chair does the work and the diligence in communicating with perhaps other parents, but also other school board members to help them understand the nuance and the context of an issue before it possibly explodes or bubbles up. But at the same time, I would presume that a head of school then has that responsibility with their staff as well.
Oh, yeah.
Their middle leaders, their principals, their teachers, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Just one more question before we move on. It seems like, I was very fortunate that I had one board chair. She was on the board. She was the president at the time when I was hired, was the board chair for my entire tenure there. I had a great relationship with her. I struggle to think what would have happened if she went off the board or there was a change in board presidency or the board chair, because I felt such a connection and I also felt like we had a good working relationship. So what are some strategies to think about when there is a transition in the board chair? Let's say you're a director, you're watching this, and that maybe your school board chair, for whatever reason, is likely to leave in the next year or two. What do you say to that director, and what can that director do to maybe assist with that transition?
Well, Katerina's probably had the most experience, but I'll jump in with my little bit of board turnover, and that would be having the leaving board and the new board talk to each other, but then have a 3 call with them and just talk about very openly, very candidly, what worked well, what didn't work well. What do you need to know? I mean, different people have different thresholds of what they need to know, trying to understand their trigger points, what things are finding the importance of professional development. I mean, would I ask my board chairs, would you please commit to meeting with me once a week, and will you commit to going to some outside professional development with me, at some conference where we can really look at the work that we do for the school? And if the previous board member who's committed to that says that to the new board member, then it tends to continue that commitment. And with that, I feel like I could work with anything.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think succession planning is definitely important. So what we like to do is create like a matrix with everyone's role and how long they've been serving, when their term will be over, and so that we're constantly managing all the moving parts. So if we know that the board chair is leaving, then who would we want the next board president to be? We engage in these conversations often enough to be prepared. And like Audrey was saying, that induction of getting the new board members armed with all the information, not just the bylaws but the strategic planning, and also bringing them up to par with where has the school been. What's the trajectory that the school has taken to get to where they are, and what do they envision for the future, and how you want the new board member to serve and help the board and with governance, with their specific, let's say, skill or the skill set or capacity that they bring to the board. And like Audrey was also saying, the professional development is key. And sometimes I'd even say outsourcing that professional development is also good. It's healthy, not just hearing it all from me or just from the board president, hearing from a third party that is professional and recognized in that role to come in and provide the professional development.
Yeah. And then, sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
No, just to reinforce kind of the underlying assumption of your question, which is, there certainly is research out there that points to long-serving heads and long-serving board chairs being a positive contributing factor to high-performing schools. So whatever we can do to encourage, long-standing board chairs to be around can be successful. It's not to say that a school can't be successful if there is that turnover, but just that can be a really positive attribute, and we can do things as school leaders and as the sitting board chair to help ensure that continuity to whatever extent possible.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Great discussion. Let's move on to our next topic, which is still talking about kind of that head of school and board relationship, but a little bit more in the context of evaluation. Obviously, the head of school is the employee, is employed by the board. But just like we have many different governance models, we probably have a lot of different evaluation models as well, with boards looking at heads of schools. So let's take a look at this, our next question. In an independent school, one of the primary responsibilities of the Board of Trustees is the hiring, nurturing, and evaluating of the head of school. Let's talk about how international schools around the world manage head of school evaluations and what's fair, what's effective, and what's best practice. All right, maybe Jeremy, we can start with you. We'd love to learn a little bit more about what you think an evaluation ought to look like for a head of school, but maybe if you're willing to share a little bit about how your system currently works at AISJ.
Yeah, there are a lot of models out there, and I think there certainly is no one best model for every school, or else everyone would be using that. It would be the holy grail of head evaluations that everyone would have. But sometimes models focus more on specific roles and responsibilities of the director, like facilities management and financial management and operations, as well as the learning program and things of that nature. I think some of those models miss maybe what Stephen Covey would call the big rocks, like what are the big things happening in the school. So I things more like the strategic plan and the overall goals, and really reflecting on and looking at progress on this big areas of work, especially in times like COVID or in a downturn of enrollment. Some evaluation on how you handle human resources might, it could possibly help to shed light on that. But I think really looking at what is the strategic plan, what are the goals, and reflecting on those big issues and having dialogue. I think the head evaluation should be co-created to some extent, and really have a partnership. One thing in the question, though, that you just played that I really love is the idea that this process should also be nurturing for the director or head of school. That doesn't happen all the time, maybe less frequently, but it is actually part of their role as the board is to nurture and ensure that the head of school has professional development and has support and feels supported in the process. So it's not just about evaluation, but also about nurturing.
Audrey, Katerina, other thoughts?
I think sometimes, going back to the weed discussion, they want to start speaking to your direct reports and that. And I don't believe that's a proper way to do an evaluation. I think doing a climate survey, an annual climate survey, that is a great idea. And there's always, questions on there specifically about the head of school, and they can see trends over time. But I do think that their job is strategic. So we should start with the strategic plan, and the goals that come out of that should be my goals for the year. And they evaluate me on that. We also have, AAIE and the National Association of Independent Schools has an international trustee handbook. They have some best practices in head of school and board evaluations. I think you have to look at them in tandem, because there is that part of how are they supporting us too. And so what we do is we have a questionnaire that we pulled largely from there. We took some things off, we edited some things, but so all the board members do a mid-year and end of year evaluation. Where they rate me and met expectations, exceeds expectations, or whatever the lower one is. I haven't gotten that one, thank goodness. And so they have that rating, and they do the same thing with my goals. And then I write up sort of a summary of what I've accomplished in a page or two. And then they all talk about the survey results. I look at what I wrote, then they meet, and then the board chair writes like a 1 or 2 page letter for me, and then my bonus is determined based on that information. And it feels so between the climate survey, the general questions that they ask about my role, and then my goals for the strategic plan, it feels balanced to me. It feels like they're doing the right thing. And by getting the mid-year and end of year, I always know where I'm standing, so there's no surprises. And that's really important too.
Katerina?
Yeah, no, I think both Jeremy and Audrey said everything I wanted to say. And I guess I could add that, like Jeremy was saying, there is no ideal or that perfect assessment tool out there. There's no unicorn head of school evaluation tool. But what's most important is that this creates an opportunity for dialogue between the board or the board chair and the head of school. And although the actual evaluation tool or the forum may vary, what's important to me is where I have 7 board members evaluating me, I just want to ensure that it's not 7 different opinions being shared with me. So I try to make that very clear to my board members, because in the past they've done something where they would rank my skills on all the different aspects of operation of the school, where they are evaluating me on my goals, on key performance indicators with the strategic plan, how far am I reaching those? I mean, you'll find all types of tools where they're measuring everything. But what's most important to me, I said, is that I don't want every 7 board member giving me a different number or a ranking and then just kind of averaging that out and saying, okay, that's your score. I let them know that that's not really helpful to me, especially when the assessment tool is supposed to be nurturing and supporting me as a head of school. So what I've asked is that they actually go over each of the standards, talk it out through a form of moderation, and then as one body, as one board, one entity, that they share with me their perception and what they expect to see me improving on. And this allows me to then use this tool to say, okay, well then can you support me in this process, because I do want to improve in this particular area. So I think that's the most important part, is to make sure that it creates an opportunity for trust and open dialogue.
Katerina, I love what you're saying, and I love how you're bringing it over to the head of school evaluation, because I remember we had a lot of discussion on our board about making decisions, which is that when we make a decision, we vote. Sometimes it's a unanimous thing. Sometimes there's different opinions. But when we go out there, we communicate that this was the decision of the board, not that I got outnumbered or they are doing something I didn't agree with. And I like how you're bringing that over to getting feedback from the board about your performance as a head of school. I do want to ask, it sounds like the 3 of you are in organizations that are fairly well developed with respect to some governance policies, but I know a lot of international school and independent school directors out there, and I've talked to them who say, I've got tons of board transition. I've got, people are coming and going. I've not been evaluated in 3 years, right? There's a lot of dysfunction on the board. So I guess my advice for you, or my question to you is, if you were talking to a director that says, hey, there's a lot of board dysfunction going on, there's a lot of turnover, I haven't been formally evaluated in a couple of years, I'm not sure how to approach the board about that, what would be your advice to them?
I think this is exactly the moment where you reach out to a third party and you talk to your board and you say, hey, I really would love to get a consultant in here to work with us on, and just do board 101, role of the board, role of the head of school, et cetera, because you can't be a prophet in your own land in that kind of a setting. You need outside support. But I still say, before you go into the school, check those things out carefully, because a lot of times the writing's already on the wall. And sometimes if it's a toxic environment, sometimes the best thing to do is just go. So those need to be on the table too.
I like that idea. And you've already mentioned it a couple of times, Audrey, that not only when you are going out for a head of school position is the board interviewing you, but you also need to be interviewing the board, right? You need to be finding out as much information as you can to know, am I going to be able to make some changes, or are there some good systems and structures in place? Maybe one more question, just kind of about head of school evaluations. And I know there's been a lot of debate on both sides of this, but I'd really love to briefly know, what are your thoughts on 360 evaluations? Because it's one thing to have a school climate survey and to be embedded in that climate survey, a few questions about this head of school and leadership. It's another thing to kind of have 360 evaluations. There's some people that I know are really for it, and some people that I know who are really against it. What are your thoughts as international school directors on 360 surveys? Any thoughts?
Well, I could tell you in my particular case, that has been proposed in the past, but I personally have argued against it. It is not something that I personally believe it would support me. I think it's okay for me to conduct surveys so that I could gather them and I could use that for my own reflection and growth and improvement. But I do think that it could cause a lot of misunderstanding and not necessarily nurture me if the board is out there just asking everyone else to appraise my work, because our role is very complicated. Oftentimes we have to make a lot of difficult decisions that are based on many factors and elements that even the board may not know about because of our day-to-day operations. So that's just my 2 cents. I personally am not a big fan of that, but maybe at another time in another place.
All right. Jeremy, Audrey, any thoughts to share on 360 evaluations?
Yeah, how valid and reliable is the information you get from that tool? How is that tool used? Ultimately, is it a vehicle for that dialogue that Kat was talking about earlier, or is it a gotcha tool or something of that nature? I mean, a lot of this, 360 evaluation, on its own may not be a bad thing, but how is it used? And is it really the right tool for your context and situation? Probably not, but maybe in certain situations it's a good approach. I don't know.
And I don't have anything else to add except my agreement, and I think it strains the boundaries that should be in place between the board and all of my employees.
Right. It seems like it could be used. You could get some decent feedback out of it, but you could be in a situation where you do have a gotcha moment, and it could sow some mistrust or, lack of trust among the head of school and board members. I certainly can see that angle. So appreciate the conversation. Let's move on to our next topic, which is talking a little bit more about board engagement, making sure not just our board president, but all of our school board members are engaged. So let's take a look at our next prompt.
One of the key characteristics of high-performing schools is a school board that is engaged, focused, and committed to their work on the board. However, one of the major issues facing nonprofit boards is the burnout of key members and leaders, which is often the byproduct of lack of board development and leadership succession. How can we work with boards to develop strategies and policies to address these challenges?
All right. Well, I think we've already heard some of the answers embedded in some of our previous discussion, but talking a little bit about board development, leadership succession, ensuring that all of our members are committed and engaged. Anyone want to start us off?
I'm happy to jump in and just say, I think there needs one of the committees on the board that's important is one focused on exactly this topic. That's a healthy board where they are constantly looking for potential board members for the appointed or elected positions and bringing them in onto committees. So you could try them out, you could sort of train them, you could see how they would be, and groom them, the right ones. So you don't have and you can weed out the ones that probably you don't want to appoint because they can't keep their parent hat off. But I think it does require in that matrix, like Katrina was talking about, where you have the board members' names, you have what skills that they have, and you also have skills that the board needs. So you're constantly looking for those right people to fill the holes in the skills that you need, especially as people rotate off.
Audrey, may I just ask a follow-up question? What standing committees do you currently have with your board? It seems like the one about succession and engagement is a standing committee. What other standing committees do you have?
So that one we combined, or sometimes have separately, depending on if it's election time, a governance committee. So we're regularly reviewing bylaws and policies. So every year there's certain policies we're looking at and updating. Of course, the finance committee, of course, a construction/facilities committee. We have an HR committee, but it's supposed to be ad hoc, but we're reviewing so many things that feels standing. So those are our main committees that we have right now.
Got it. Katerina, do you also have a committee looking at board retention, board engagement, or does your school employ a different strategy?
No, just like Audrey's school, we also have a governance committee. That's a standing committee, and that's their job, is just constantly to be on the lookout for potential future board candidates. And another standing committee that we have is the finance committee, and we right now have the development committee as well.
Jeremy?
Same. Governance committee is the key. That's what I would, if I had started, I would have said that very simply. The governance committee is the key. It focuses on, the strategic policies, the personnel within the committees, gap analyses, etc. Our other standing committees beyond governance are finance committee, and we have a risk and compliance committee is our third one. That's become quite developed in the last couple of years and pretty successful. And actually, our facilities committee is actually integrated into that risk and compliance committee right now.
All right.
And I forgot we have an audit committee as well to do the audit, select the auditors and do the audit.
And may I ask, as school board or as heads of school and directors, are you actively involved in all of those committees, or are you maybe sitting on the sidelines for a couple of those? And are you also getting other school leaders in your school, teachers, principals, involved in those committees? Or is it more just maybe a board member or two and them reaching out to a couple of parents that they think might also be interested?
That's a great question, Wallace. So at our school, we also use our committees to bring in future parent board members to join the board. And this is a great way for them to get to know our work, understand better our strategic planning, how we implement, how the board operates. And it's also good for the board to also see, okay, what capacity these committee members bring to the school. So that is mostly with our parents, because the board and its committees are made up of the parent leaders who represent the association. But prior to creating our strategic plan, which then the work gets dispersed through the different committees as well, we make sure that the students, teachers, parents, that they're all involved in sharing their ideas and their vision, so that everyone has an opportunity to have a voice, so that we could use their voice to create this vision for our strategic plan. So that's been helpful for us in making sure that we have different stakeholder involvement in the future planning of our school.
Jeremy, Audrey, any thoughts to share?
We also use our committees for succession planning or really informing parents about board work and encouraging certain ones to really join the board. That succession planning, it really is key.
And as far as
go ahead, sorry.
As far as other stakeholders go, we just invite the ones that make sense. For our HR committee, I've got my head of HR. For the construction committee. I have my facilities director of finance and operations, and like we just finished a cafeteria, so I had the cafeteria manager there. So it just makes sense. And then for the whole board meetings, that's when I tend to bring in, as appropriate, different teachers or principals or whatever, based on what we're talking about that time.
Yeah, I just remember my experience. Sometimes you can convert some of your biggest naysayers and critics into your friends by extending an olive branch and extending an invitation. Hey, do you want to participate in this committee? Hey, we're getting a group together to explore this topic. And so you can change them from just being a naysayer and, talking a lot of things and gibberish in WhatsApp chats to actually doing some really good work for the school and bringing a fresh perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're closing out here, I know this has been an incredible discussion, and we probably are going to have lots of other international school board members looking at it, a lot of international school heads, but we also have some younger folks who are looking to get into administration, or maybe some young heads of school. So I guess my parting question to you is, if you could give some advice to your younger self, or you could give some advice to a young aspiring head of school who may be in their first year or looking to get in their first position about school board governance, what would it be?
Well, I could go first. I guess I'd say develop a trusting relationship. Don't be afraid. I think when I first started, I was really intimidated by the idea of my 7-member, board. And another lesson that I've learned is I had to remind myself, hey, I work for the board. I mentioned this earlier. We work for the board, and it's not just about me fulfilling my own educational belief or fulfilling my own agenda as the head of school, but really working in synchronization with the board. I think there really needs to be this open alignment of values to make sure that you can work in a very trusting relationship. And I guess a third advice would be, don't be afraid to ask for assistance. They're there for that, and you'll be surprised that they really do want to help you. So don't be afraid to actually develop relationships with each and every one of your board members, not just your board chair. Each of your board members come with different expertise, different knowledge, and be sure to use them as a sounding board. It really helps in like I said, building trust and building that alignment as you move forward. Just knowing that we all are coming to the table and making this our important decisions with the best intention for the school.
Thank you, Katerina. Great advice. Anybody else?
I would add that lanes sometimes have dotted lines. So it's really easy to say that, oh, this is my lane, this is your lane. And it sounds great, but there are times, well, first of all, you really shouldn't expect that every single board member is always going to fully understand that. And, you really should expect that people are going to be out of their lane here and there, and not be offended by that, but actually use it as a learning opportunity and, talk about it openly. But also the fact that sometimes we need board members, and especially a board chair, in your lane at times. I mean, during COVID crisis, during major downturn of enrollment, we lost our finance manager who was only there for less than a year. And, our board director had a huge amount of historical knowledge that was really helpful. I was asking her to get in the weeds. Come on, help me here. Just what Katerina was saying, ask for assistance and leverage that intellectual capacity and historical knowledge of the organization, of these people that can help you. So yes, there's this idea, stay in your lane, but not always. Let the lanes have dotted lines. That's my advice.
The lanes have dotted lines. Great advice. Audrey?
Yeah, I like the deadlines. I always think of it as gray. There's the farther up you go, the more gray exists. The black and white just melts away. I would say the only other thing I would add on the working with the board part is just, if something is in your gut is not right, you feel like a relationship with the board member is not right, or so, don't let it fester. Go deal with it straight away. Just go say, in that last board meeting, you made this comment, and I just wanted to talk to you a little bit to understand where you were coming from. I felt this. You use all your strategies for having difficult conversations, but it's always better to nip those things early rather than let them grow. And then additionally to what you all were saying, I think being a head of school is a lonely job. I don't think people know. I mean, you can't be best friends with your leadership team. I mean, you can't do it because they all report to you, and you report to the board. So they really can't be your best friends either. So you really need to find friends and support outside your school community. And I think it's great to find especially some peer groups out there. Like I have a women's head of school group that I love, and I have people I've just gotten to know over the years that I call when I'm like, okay, I just need someone to check where I am. I'm so mad about this, and I'm ready to fire these people, and I'm ready to quit, or whatever. And then, just having someone I can vent that to that isn't in the school community is wonderful. And then I can come back to my senses. I step back 12 notches and I'm fine again. And the support groups, or it can also include even like a mentor or a coach that works with boards, that's not necessarily your friend, but as a professional that can help you think through things. I think for this level of job, that's a really important thing as well, that I wish I'd known when I started.
It's a lonely job. No one you feel like you're on an island. So developing that support group is so important. Almost like this conversation, and almost being able to share some things and what's working and some challenges. And before we finish, I do want to celebrate and do a little bit of a shameless plug, because we're writing a book together. It's on international education, and that's kind of the bond that brought us all together in the first place. And it's leadership lessons from international schools all over the world. If you're an international school educator, you know how wacky international schools can sometimes be. If you're not in international schools, then read the book and you'll find out how wacky it is. Katerina, give us a high-level overview, and then maybe before we go, Jeremy and Audrey, we'd love to hear a little bit about your chapter contribution.
Yeah, I want to say that what you're going to find in this book is everything that a master's in educational leadership will never tell you about. So you will find a lot of good tips, a lot of good secrets. So I'm not going to give any highlights because I want everybody to get a book and read it for themselves. Lots of juicy, fun stories in there.
Awesome. Jeremy, tell us, without giving everything away, because we want people to pick up a copy of the book, but tell us a little bit about your chapter, and then we'll pass it over to Audrey before we close out.
I like Kat's approach and not really want to tell anyone, but no, my chapter really is around, the compass of leadership, what guides us, the mission, vision, and values of schools. What do we believe? What are our principles? And then, how do we not get lost? And so it really looks at just those really foundational aspects of what are we here for? What's our purpose? Why do we do what we do? And using guiding statements to guide the school ultimately, and to try to energize people towards a vision that can be your preferred future. So it's kind of just that, that basic, fundamental mission, vision, values sort of chapter.
Awesome. Audrey, tell us a little bit about your chapter.
And mine's really about culture and community and working with people. And in international schools, you'll often find, while you may have umpteen nationalities, they often clump into either the local hires, and then you've got the expat hires, and it can almost feel like two different schools. And so how do you break down those walls and intentionally create a culture, an inclusive, truly inclusive culture where it feels like one school? So that's not an easy job, and it's a common problem in most international schools.
Awesome. Well, I am so excited and grateful for everyone to contributing to this book. I'm super excited about it. So make sure you pick up a copy if you are watching this and want to learn more about the fascinating world of international education. And I want to thank Katerina, I want to thank Jeremy, I want to thank Audrey for spending some time today, sharing their perspective, whether you are another head of school, a board member, a principal, anyone who has an interest in bettering outcomes for students all over the world. We hope you've enjoyed this session. I want to remind everyone to follow us at SchoolRubric. If you want to learn more about international school governance, sign up for the course at schoolrubric.org. Jeremy, Katerina, Audrey, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wallace.
Thank you for watching School Rubric on YouTube. Make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe in order to stay looped in on all of our diverse collection of shows, interviews, panels, tutorials, and more from educators around the globe. And visit us at SchoolRubric.com for even more great content, such as our online articles, Interact magazine, featured podcasts, and more. Thank you.